Let's upcycle a tote bag using punch needle and turn it into something that not only looks nice, but is also functional. So before we can get started with any sort of upcycling, we're going to have a finished punch needle piece. For functionality's sake, I'm going to suggest that you make it a square or rectangle and make it larger than around 7 inches. I have mine here, which is a square that's about 9 by 9 inches. And in terms of the design, feel free to make whatever you want. In the spirit of upcycling here, my design is made entirely up of yarn scraps that I had left over. Once you have your finished punch needle piece, you're going to want to steam press it so that it lies flat. This is provided you're using wool or some other natural fiber. With acrylic or other synthetics, doing this will ruin your project even before you've really started. My suggestion for steam pressing synthetics is to have your iron on a low setting and have a piece of cotton fabric in between your project and the iron as a buffer. But even if you have this, just remember to exercise caution. Now that our punch needle square is flat, we're going to hem it using a mitered corner. First, you're going to want to mark a border outside of your piece for hemming. The amount you're going to want to mark will depend on the size of your piece. For mine, I'm marking about 2 inches outside of my piece with a black Sharpie and 3/4 of an inch outside of the corners, and then cutting those out. Next, we've got a lot of pressing and clipping, so I'm going to explain this nice and quick. We're going to start off by pressing in and clipping the corners. Next, we're going to press in the sides. Finally, we're going to fold the sides inwards in half, press them in again, and then clip them. Now that everything is pressed and clipped, we're going to sew using a whip stitch. I'm using monk's cloth strings here for whip stitching, but I recommend button and craft thread if you'd like to use actual thread. So I'm sewing up the sides using a whip stitch and making stitches that are 1/2 inch apart, and then sewing up the corners using a very tiny ladder stitch. For a more in-depth description on how to do this, I recommend checking out the Oxford Company's video on hemming. So now we have a hemmed punch needle square, yay us. We can attach this to our tote bag as is and make a nice fun pocket, but we're going to make things better by adding a lining fabric to this square. And you can use whatever sort of fabric you want. This is cotton flannel. And I've ironed out all the wrinkles in this fabric beforehand so that it's easier to cut out accurately. So I'm cutting it out so that it's a couple inches bigger than my punch needle piece. We're going to pin this fabric in place on top of our square and then sew it to the square using an invisible stitch. And I'm using button and craft thread here for this. And while you're doing this, if you see that your lining fabric is folding in on itself, it's fine, it's no big deal. Now, before we sew this lining fabric up fully, I want to make this tote bag even better by adding some snap buttons. I want to do this so that we can have a way to make a pocket that opens and closes. And I thought I'd have to sew these on, but you actually attach these with prongs, kind of like a duotang. Shouts out to everyone who knows what a duotang is. So I made small cuts in my lining fabric here to attach one side of the button and then just folded the prongs out to make sure that it was attached. Now that I'm done that, I can fully sew this lining shut. Now our final step here is to sew this square to our tote bag. But before I do that, I'm going to add the other half of my snap button to my tote bag. And these buttons are surprisingly strong, especially considering they were on a really cheap and old wallet. So if I close them shut while I'm sewing, the square stays in place, which makes it really easy to sew onto the tote bag. Again, I'm sewing this up using some button and craft thread using an invisible stitch. and only sewing the sides and the bottom. And with that, we have an upcycled tote bag with a sturdy and functional punch needle pocket. This is a great place to put items that you need to take out often on the go, and I think the snap button closure makes it difficult for thieves to inconspicuously grab your stuff, which is good. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to like and subscribe, and leave a comment if you end up trying this out yourself.